Hello everyone, I am Stephen Drew from the Architecture Social, and currently right now I am wallpapering. I'm not wallpapering, I'm painting my rooms, which means that I'm living in the living room, so this is an audio only podcast. However, I'm super thrilled to be joined by an architect called Laura Simpkins, who has a fantastic architectural practice. I originally saw her post on Instagram, which I'd recommend you check out. But Laura's here virtually with me. Laura Simpkins, how are you today?
Hi, Stephen. I'm very good, thank you. All the better for a bit of sunshine and Boris telling us that our kids are going back to school. Hooray!
Hooray! That is good news, isn't it? And we'll have to get you on another time, because I've got the pleasure of seeing your office here, and you've got the Pride Road house in the background. You've got the Pride Road banners. But for anyone that doesn't know you at all, Laura, so tell me a little bit about yourself and your practice at the moment, and what you're up to.
Well, I have my own practice, but I'm a franchisee of the brand Pride Road. So my practice is called Pride Road, New Forest and Bournemouth, because that's the area that I work in. So I live down in the New Forest in Hampshire, and I specialise in house extensions, remodelling projects, and loft conversions. Since we've gone online, my area has got bigger, so I am working as far afield as Bristol and Portsmouth and various places, but I'm now sort of just specialising in the domestic market, and I'm a very new practice. I started January 2020.
Yay, 2020. So you went, yeah, I'm going to set up a practice, and then 2 months later, the pandemic came. Huh?
It sounded like a really auspicious year to start something, nice kind of even number. And I just got to that point, my kids were a bit older, and I thought, yeah, definitely time to do something for myself. And I remember a fellow architect who reminded me of this recently. We were at New Year's party together, and I was telling him what I was doing, and I was all full of confidence. I was like, oh, it's going to be amazing. And I said to him, what can possibly go wrong? And he reminded me of that a couple of months ago.
Famous last words.
Probably a good job I didn't know what was ahead, really.
Yeah, I mean, I ran my own business many years ago, and I think that with businesses, you've kind of got to just jump 2 feet in, and what comes your way comes your way. And I tell you what, though, if you can handle this year, you can handle any year. So you're still open, still profitable, still going. So you're doing something right, Laura. That's amazing.
Yeah, it was a definite kind of panic moment in that first March. But I think for me, because I'd started on my own, I was actually panicking anyway. So I felt like I jumped off a cliff starting in January. And obviously I'd borrowed money to try and break even by a certain point. And then for me, when the pandemic started, it was more just like the other side of that cliff suddenly got moved a lot further away. But I was already jumping.
I think you've done really well, and so that is amazing. What I'd love to know is, and we'll talk a little bit about the business layer, but what I'm really keen to learn, because I imagine there's a lot of people out there like yourself who have maybe done a bit of freelancing before. I can see that you worked in architectural practices in the past, and you've done freelancing. So I'd love to know a little bit about your journey up until this point. Do you want to tell me a little bit about your first few roles in industry? How did you,
of course.
Around the time you're getting your Part 3 and all that, I'd love to know.
Well, in the dark and distant past, when I qualified, I started off at Broadway Mallion, so international practice.
Oh, cool.
And that was my first practice. It was quite heady times. There was quite a lot of work around, and I was there for about 3 or 4 years, and I got qualified whilst I was there. It was a great practice to start off in, because there were loads of resources, loads of training, it was very business orientated, and they really threw me in the deep end. I mean, I was managing sort of multi-million-pound projects pretty quickly, and very full on. But the thing that I missed, and interestingly, my examiner at my Part 3 actually mentioned this. So all of my projects were design and build. And that's just how it was. It was commercial office buildings and big residential projects and kind of mixed use developments. And they're all design and build. So I managed to wing it and get through my part 3. But the guy who was doing the interview did say, probably time to now look at some other different types of practice just for your own benefit. So you see different ways of being an architect. And that was good. I would have done that, I think, anyway. And it was kind of nice to have that push. So then I looked for a more design-led practice, and I ended up in a practice called the Genesis Design Studio. They're based in Romsey in Hampshire. And this was the days when there was a lot of money in education. And I'd actually started off, my first ever bit of work experience was at Buckinghamshire County Council, working for the county architect. My dad was a headmaster at the time, and I worked on the extension for his school. And I really loved it because I'd kind of grown up hanging around waiting for my dad to come out of school and sort of lived in schools. And I loved designing the kind of challenge of the sort of public-private and the different classrooms. That was really interesting to me. So this practice, Genesis Design, they specialised in schools and they did some really lovely designs. And when I was there, I very much saw proper architecture, sort of how it should be. Our clients were school governors, so they were very invested and very interested in getting the best result, but it wasn't like working for a developer who was going to be value engineering your scheme. They were all up for getting as beautiful a building as they could, and there was quite a bit of funding around. So we just designed really nice buildings, and I loved it. It was great. It was how I thought being an architect would be.
Amazing. Yeah, I think it's quite interesting because you just mentioned Broadway Malin. I know Broadway Malin really well, so they're massive. Oh, yeah. So it's the totally different end of the scale, and I quite enjoy how things can change over time. And I think it's important for anyone listening. As an architect, you don't need to be typecast into one typology or sector of building. So, what was it like as a first step going from the big Broadway Malin buildings of the world and using the next steps? Was that a bit of a difference, kind of changing scales, or what was your experience along that side?
Yeah, definitely things like the office culture, and I remember being very shocked by their pretty backwards admin systems, because obviously somewhere like Broadway Malin has to be so up with it. They were sort of ISO accredited this, and it was all about streamlining, and you had 1,000,001 different intranet systems. And then Genesis Design was 3 directors that had set it up and just did really nice buildings, and it worked for what it needed to be, but it was a huge change from that point of view. But on the other hand, gave you quite a lot more time to just get on with designing the buildings. And it was a much more kind of old-fashioned apprentice type experience. So in working for a big commercial practice, your role models in the early stage were, I worked very closely with one of the directors, and it was very businessy, and we were swanning around the country, and it was quite full on. Working very closely with the directors at Genesis Design was like a sort of old-fashioned apprenticeship. Like, you learnt by listening to them on the phone and watching them drawing and going to site meetings. And because it was smaller, you could absorb a lot more as long as you're somewhere where the people you really admire and they're doing really good work. Such a great way to learn. I think you absorb it.
Yeah, do you know what makes me laugh when you're saying that? Because I had a similar experience where at EPR Architects, where I worked, which is a big architectural practice in London. It's the same thing. That intranet, that the filing conventions were down. And then I moved to not a smaller architectural practice, but a recruitment consultancy at the time. And, you'd open up the R drive and it would just be Pandora's box of a mess. Yeah. And I've seen that once or twice where, a smaller architectural practice, as you say, doesn't have quite as much naming conventions. And in one sense, it's quite freeing because you can just get on with it. But there is a tipping point, isn't there, with smaller practices where I guess you do need to invite some structure. Otherwise, you just get the equivalent of student drawings, which are final 111 or...
Exactly, yes. Yeah, when I was there, we actually converted over to Vectorworks, and we just learnt it by doing it. There wasn't really money for training courses or 3-day, going off and getting someone in. We sort of found the manual, downloaded it, and figured it out. And I think that kind of thing does appeal to a lot of architects are real sort of inventors, aren't they, really? And they love to find stuff out and do it themselves. And that was very much the culture that was there. But it was great. And it was the heady days where there was lots of work and a lot of control over the work. So that's where I was next. And then I had a child. So I was there for 4 years, full time, had my first child. I was sort of 29, 30, had my first child. And when I went back just 2 days a week, which was what I wanted. I just decided it was, I don't know, I think it's funny, all these years later, I think I was trying to be a very good mum, and now I've really lost interest. This is 17 years ago, so that baby is now doing her A-levels. But yeah, so I went back 2 days a week, and it worked quite well flexibly, but I was really just helping them out. They were so busy, and I went back sort of on my own terms, and I was just doing drawing work, really. And so that kind of worked fine. But then second child came along, and shortly after we got to 2008. So the inevitable happened. I was made redundant. I was the first to be made redundant.
Oh, no.
So despite being kind of, the protege that, I could have stayed there probably all my career. I'd have liked to. But, I mean, eventually they went down to sort of 2 or 3 people. But because I was 2 days a week, of course, I was the first to go. And that's what happened. And I was kind of gutted, but equally I wasn't that gutted, because it wasn't like I didn't have anything to do. I was full on trying to work with 2 kids. But yeah, that was a really tricky time, because obviously there was no other jobs around. I actually became a piano teacher for a little while.
Oh,
so
really?
I would definitely say to any budding architects, any other skills you've got, just keep them going. You never know when you're going to be using something. Like I was going up to the local old people's home and playing the piano for them and things like that. And you just wouldn't think you'd have to, but we've got to be ready for, obviously, this has been very different the last couple of years, but you do know that redundancies are going to happen. They're pretty much a guaranteed in your career once or twice. Yeah. So you might have to call on other resources. And at the same time, I was doing the odd planning application and bits and pieces from home, but not really because I wanted to, just to pay the mortgage.
I think that's really sound advice. I mean, I was a part one during the 2009 global recession, and I remember I was lucky enough to get a job, and the week I joined, the week after, they made people redundant, because it was just it was an awful time, and I remember it vividly, and I can imagine that. Actually, last year was pretty rough in architecture as well. You had a lot of very good people being made redundant. And you're right, unfortunately, at the time, as with some businesses, when tough times come like this, unfortunately, anyone, as you said, that's part-time or on contract, you're sadly the first people out the door. But that's really good advice for anyone. I love the fact that you were playing the piano. That's quite sweet, isn't it? In the old biddy's home. That's really kind of you. So you did that. So during that time, there was a combination of freelancing. It was a combination of you getting by, tough times. Yeah. And so you returned to architectural practice then. Is that right?
I did. I was out for 4 years, and I did have another baby, because I just thought, not working. I kind of had always wanted 3. I mean, that sort of was the ultimate career suicide, really, having the 3rd child. I definitely wouldn't recommend that to anyone listening.
Really?
But, and then I just needed a proper job. We just needed the money. So when the youngest was 1, I sent out tons of CVs and just looked at what was round. Still pretty tricky times, but there were a few jobs, and I managed to get a job. Actually, I was trying to get a part-time job, and I managed to persuade a practice in Ringwood. I saw an advert. They were advertising for an architectural assistant, so way below where I was. I was obviously an experienced architect by that stage. But I basically said to them, look, I want to work part-time, so you could get someone more experienced for the same money, but I'm just going to work I'll do 3.5 days and fit it into 3 days. And they went for it. And I got the job.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I've had people talk about that dilemma of you see a Part 2 architectural assistant role online and you're an architect, or say now you're a qualified architect overseas but not quite in the UK. I think during these times you've got to do what you can to get by. But what's interesting here, and I appreciate your candid talk about it, it's very tricky, isn't it, as a mother, and with architecture historically as well. I think so. What's quite nice, and we'll get on to what you've done with Pride Road and kind of running your own business and taking, giving yourself the flexibility to work it around your family. But an observation I would say many years, having worked in recruitment for many years, is that it would be interesting to see in the next few years, but historically it's very tough. Apologies, my thing's going off. 1 second. Here we go, 1 second. Delivery man, isn't it, Laura, in the interview? Here we go. Hey, we'll keep that in. That's how we roll in these interviews, isn't it? Life happens. Do you like my doorbell? Look how loud that was.
I know, it happens. Even on Radio 4, you hear somebody's phone going off, don't you? Or a notification or a cat. Yeah. I
kind of like to keep it all in because I kind of think it adds to the character of it. I think that mothers get much harder time in architecture returning to work. It's such a struggle. I've seen so many talented people, so many talented single parents, so many mothers, and juggling the fact of especially younger children and going back to work is exceptionally difficult, and it can prevent you actually in some places historically getting the job, and it's just really, really tough. And I do think that is one of the reasons why we did have such a big gender pay gap between male and female architects. But I'm hopeful as well that now the one thing out of the pandemic which is interesting is that now people are more open in architectural practices to working at home, which I think really changes it. But surely from your experience, I mean, what was it like before? You mentioned working part-time. You mentioned you're juggling a family. I mean, the idea of working remotely historically, I imagine, was an alien concept or very difficult to get employers on board to that idea.
It was, and it wasn't for want of asking. And they were very nervous about it. There was worry about, you'd bring viruses, not real life viruses, computer viruses, into the office by sort of taking work home. And there are all sorts of potential issues, which obviously now every practice has managed to get over in a month. But it was just occasionally directors would work from home a little bit as a sort of, and it had just started to come in. I think one of the directors was doing a day a week or something, but the idea of the masses doing it was very far away. It felt like it was probably about 10 years away. And interestingly, I'm on the committee for Women in Property, Solent branch, and a couple of the girls on that committee are they're pregnant, and they're talking to their employers about how they're going to go forward. And particularly working for bigger practices, there does seem to be quite a bit of talk about now structurally changing how they work and having the opportunity for everybody to work from home once or twice a week. And that's just built into how they operate. And if you do that and your other half does that, it's a total game changer for bringing up a family. So I think... Yeah, it is. I think it's going to be fundamentally different, and not just because of how it will be for the women, but a lot of how you have to operate if you've got a family is you basically think, well, one of us has got to keep a decent job with a decent salary, and so you choose who that is. It's not always the women, but the other one that it isn't is inevitably going to be the one that's got to be there for school pickup or sort out inset day or when they're sick. And it is very hard to juggle that. And I remember the interview with this third practice, one of the directors saying, so could we just have you like on tap? So if we're busy, we get you to come in. And another one.
When you're not tapped in, isn't it? That's not going to work. The bills don't get paid.
And also, how do you do that with children? And another of the directors who had kids just said to him, there's no way that a parent can do that. Like, to work, if they had seen the sort of, I'd have 10 sheets of A4 of working out the logistics of which child was going where, what we're doing, how I was covering the summer holiday, all this kind of thing. And then I'd just pretend that it was all fine and be like, oh yeah, so I could do this, this and this day. But actually to manufacture that happening was an incredible amount of work. So the thought that you could just drop everything and pop in when they needed you, there's no way. I mean, that's not how life works. Unless you had the kids on your back, that's not going to happen.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, and I've seen it as well. It's just very difficult. So you were at this point in your life, and your personal life, your professional life, and you had that kind of, I guess, epiphany moment. There's always an itch, isn't there, at some point where you think like, do you know what? I'm gonna start something on my own, which can also be an incredibly exciting idea and daunting idea. But I'd love to hear what your thought process was back then. Should I start something out? Shouldn't I? Oh gosh, What should I do?
Well, when I was at this practice, they were very good, and I did work part time. You know, there was nothing, they made everything as easy as possible. But the big problem is that culturally, you're the only one doing it. There's no one else part time, and you just don't feel like you're really part of things. And that isn't really reflecting badly on the particular practice or the directors or anything like that. It's just this culture that we have where working part-time or working not normal hours isn't seen as any way to progress your career. So I would see people younger than me then getting promoted because they were there all the time. And it was just this, it is just a structural issue in the profession, I think. Like, my very good friend from university is a GP. And so she studied medicine with me. We're the same age. She's got 3 kids. And during her career, she became a GP, had her kids, but stayed being a partner in a practice. And it's just not an issue. And I think everybody in her practice is part-time. And this is what we need to get to. We need to have it that within the profession, there are different ways of doing things, and they're just choices that you make. And you even know ahead that is a choice you can make if you're the sort of person that thinks, I think actually for 10 years I probably would quite like to just work 3 or 4 days a week. That's an option. It's not convincing people and trying to be like everyone else that actually it's okay to be like that. So I had, because I'd seen her and how it was in other professions, I think it made me just not want to accept how things were working part-time when no one else was. I just didn't like it. I didn't like the feeling. I knew I just wasn't being used to my potential. We'd just gone into Revit. We were all sitting there by the computer. I just felt like a slow death sitting by a computer, picking roof types all day. Like, that's not why I went into profession. And so I didn't start up on my own immediately. I just left. And what I did was, I just knew I needed to not be, I needed to do something that was a lot less stressful for a little while to have a proper think about where I'd go to. And actually my eldest wasn't very well. So that was the trigger that made me think, right, I just need to get out and have a bit of a think. And so I left, and I think my practice thought I was having a midlife crisis. And they said to me, Laura, just pick up the phone any time and come back. Because what I did was I got a job in our local library, which is like not what you think is on the horizon for your architectural career, but it was close to home. It was very part-time hours. It was easy and simple. Although, having said that, at the interview, I had to read a story, a children's story to women that I'd never seen in my life before, which is probably tougher than any architectural interview that I've had.
Wow.
And I actually beat 50 people to that job, which I don't think I've ever quite done that in an architectural job as well. Anyway.
Wow.
So, yes. That's 2 years in the library, and then I set up on my own. Then I came to my senses and got back into architecture.
Well, I think got to give it credit. I do value, as you said, I think it's good to have a bit of time out, and I think that probably the library helped you get where you are, so it's not a waste of time. Do you know
Definitely
what I
mean? No. It was. I think it was very, very valuable because I had the time to think. It was the sort of job that you just did it when you were there and came home again. But there are a lot of things I found in that job in the library that had been missing in my architectural career. So Some of the things what I discovered I really liked was I really like working with the public. So my previous practice, we've been doing lots of big housing developments, working with developers. You know what it's like. You do a scheme, they mark it up with their red pen and send it back to you, and then phone you up and see if you've changed it, like literally 5 minutes after they sent it to you. And they're kind of, it's quite frustrating. So, but in the library, obviously, you do have some interesting characters come in, but on the whole, you've got your normal public, and they're just really nice. And if you are quite kind and explain things well, they're so grateful. And I just thought I quite like dealing with normal people, and I'm quite good at it. I quite like sort of the education side and explaining things. And that, I mean, you wouldn't believe how hard it is working in library, where there's been so many cuts that every librarian, although we can't call ourselves librarian because that's also a chartered profession.
Really?
No, we
what
weren't.
Were you?
I think I was a library team assistant.
Oh my gosh, you were a part two of the library world.
There's a bit of a theme going on here, isn't there? But
yeah.
I mean, number one, it gave me so many good dinner party stories working there, because just there was never a dull moment. But I was with a team of it's a sort of job, it's full of part-time women. So I just found people like me, other mums, and you could sit there at your lunch and say, well, what's your, talk about GCSEs or all the things that are on your mind that you're trying to sort out with your kids. And I had other people to talk to about it. And I hadn't really had that very much in my architectural career. So basically I had friends that were kind of people in a similar stage of life. And of course, in architecture, because so many women drop off after the children's stage, what's missing for the people that manage to cling on is that camaraderie and support network. Yeah. And even so, since starting up on my own, I have, like I said, I've got involved in things like women in property. But if you're a mum and you're busy and you're trying to work and be a mum, you don't really have time for any of those extra bits. And so all that extra networking that kind of is there as a support, it's quite hard to fit that in.
Yeah.
So I was at the library a couple of years. I had basically one night, I just thought I do need to probably get back into architecture. What shall I do? I had a friend that had asked me to set up with her. Another friend had set up a practice and they wanted me to join them. And I did go back and visit my old practices, and I was just doing a lot of sounding out, seeing what kind of felt right. And I had become aware of Pride Road. Late one night, I Googled architect mum, and funny enough, I was actually looking for a podcast. I thought there's got to be one other person in the country that's like me at this stage and that's managing the same issues. And I just was looking for like a YouTuber or somebody online, and Pride Road came up because they've got a very content heavy website, and I just started looking at the things that they had on there, and it was just on my radar, but I knew it was a full-time hours, so I kind of hung on for a year or so until I felt like the kids were in the right bit older, and until I felt ready, and then I approached them. So yeah, that's what happened really.
Amazing. Wow, I'm loving it. I feel like a fly on the wall of the journey, but it's so interesting, and life's lessons, and everyone goes through their different way. And I think that the library in a mad way actually makes complete sense. And it's bizarre sometimes, isn't it? Where sometimes in life, some of these, like as you said, now you have your own Pride Road architectural practice, but all this stems from Googling late at night, thinking like there's got to be another way. And I think it's great, and I quite like Lisa's approach as well, where she really, Pride Road's open to all. That's the point. However, very supportive of, I guess, flexibility in people's lives. And so what I'd love to know is why you kind of decided to go ahead. So now we were Googling Lisa. You saw Lisa and her fabulous glasses, and with the website. And what kind of made you think, do you know what, I deserve this, I'm gonna go for it, I'm gonna pick up the phone, or I want my own franchised it's your own practice, you know what I mean? What made you do it? Pick up the call? Were you nervous, or were you like, oh, should I do this? Should I explore it?
Yeah, of course I was nervous. I mean, I'd had a couple of years out, and I had managed to carry on with my ARB registration. So, in your mind is always you can't have that long out before getting back in again. So I did feel like the clock was ticking, and I think it was a gut feeling of, I suppose, because I've tried out different things, really, the next thing I was going to do, I knew that if I wasn't quite brave now, perhaps in 5 years' time I wouldn't be. I've potentially got 15, 20 years left of my career, but actually if I was 5 years older, would I think, I don't think I'm quite up for a challenge. So I definitely felt like I was ready. I was up for a challenge and kind of had nothing to lose. Like, I was working in a library. I was having to do test the different testing on the heating of the radiators, and like leukemia testing and emptying out the hose pipes. It really wasn't what you think like being in the library was. So I definitely had nothing to lose, and I tried different ways of doing things. And of course, this was the pre-pandemic world where I knew that my kids are at 3 different schools, and I just knew I had a bit of a complicated life. And although they're getting older, I still didn't want to just completely be 9 to 6, Monday to Friday, and never have that flexibility to be around, because there's still lots of school holidays and inset days and things like that. I mean, the irony is, since setting up my own business, I don't think I've really talked to them for the last year, because turns out setting up your own business is flipping hard work.
It's definitely hard work. I've done it myself as well, and there's a lot of fun involved. And there's also, you make lots of mistakes, and there's a lot of hard work. It's a combination of everything. I do think it's definitely worth exploring. If anyone's got the itch out there, I recommend it. I mean, the mistakes I made, Laura, I mean, they're valuable in life. And I think because I work full time. I work for a large company called McDonald Company. Great company. It's what I would say though is I've got a thick skin, because once you run your own business and you've got people banging on the door and all this stuff, nothing really shakes me in this kind of role now. And you know what I mean. But with that comes immense thrills from it. And so what's interesting is, so when I had my own recruitment business, I'm not a number person. Okay, I can do percentages, right? I can navigate an Excel spreadsheet, but that's about as far as I go in terms of my own personal ability. So one of the things that we did was we outsourced the back of office. And so while I didn't run a franchise, what is interesting is that I outsourced parts of the operation of running the business. And what it allowed me to do was concentrate on the main task, which in your case is architecture. For me, it was recruitment. So what has it been like so far from your perspective? So you started in January, and so in March we've got the pandemic. So how does it affect the way you do architecture? So do you want to run me maybe how it's set up in a broad sense, so that we can give any listeners a flavour? We don't need specifics, but what's it like at the moment? Do you spend your day going out meeting clients? Are you able to focus on the architecture? What's it like as being part of a larger franchise but running your own architectural practice?
Well, before the pandemic, we were very face-to-face with clients all the time. So because we're just doing residential projects, the way it's set up is that you do all of the front end stuff, but then we outsource our CAD drawings to a technician. So the main bulk of my work, of my actual architecture work, is doing free initial consultations with clients, which is looking, before the pandemic, was driving to their house, looking around, and then talking to them about how we work and going through lots of questions and talking about budget and all sorts of hard-hitting things, and giving them a bit of education, a bit of perhaps talking about some planning issues that they might have or something like that. And then they book in the next the next bit of work we do with them is a concept design workshop. So that's where we do 3 or 4 options for their house. They're live with them. So pre-pandemic, that was at their kitchen table, and we'd go and survey the house, draw it up at there whilst we were there, and do this workshop with them. So you're basically drawing the brief out of them. You draw what they want, and then you help them to decide, is that really going to be the right thing? Often you kind of know up your sleeve much better way of doing it, but you're talking about how do they live, and where are the priorities, and where are the compromises, and is this ever going to be possible in their budget, those kind of things. But you're doing it through drawing. So it's actually such a different way of working. It's not being back, you weren't back in your office drawing for hours on end, making 4 million different choices. It's trying to make it as simple as possible for the client, but also the architect, because the idea is that this is quite a systems-based way of working, because then it is meant to fit in your life. So lots of architects don't work in the residential sector because, number one, you'd never make money. And number two, clients, of course, it's their house, it's emotive, they're quite demanding, and they want you to be their very own personal architect, and they want to be able to email you and tell you they've had a different idea, and could you just draw it for them? And you've got to have boundaries, and that's why this appealed to me, this approach, because it's so systemized, you know exactly what you give them in terms of time, you know when you might do an extra meeting, but it doesn't slip into being all hours and constant, just overthinking everything, which obviously as architects, we're very much trained that we're that way by nature, and then we get worse during the training, and we just become utter perfectionists. And this is a way of managing that as well. So since the pandemic, both of those two things now happen online, and we do it all over Zoom. We've got document cameras that look at what we're drawing, and we don't see the clients. And then if the project moves on to a planning application, we then get we all have a technician that we've interviewed technicians. We outsource to chartered architectural technicians, and we all have our own one. So you form a really nice relationship with them, get to know how each other works. It's almost feels like a little bit of a partnership, although they're still doing their own work. But my technician in this last year, I've given him so much work that he's now just employed somebody else. So you become...
Oh, gosh. Yeah, wow. That's amazing.
You become their best client because you're constantly giving them work. And then when a project goes to a planning application, then at the moment, that's when we go to the house and we have a good look around and we discuss the planning drawings with the client. And that's when we talk about the elevations. And then we do the building regs, and then we do a pre-contract meeting and a handover to the builder. So we all sort of form part of what I quite liked about Pride Road was that there was a lot of very specific training. So I've had very specific training on networking and how to get these kind of, like, I've joined BNI, which is this international networking group. And through that, I've now got a builder that I refer my clients to for like ballpark figures after their workshops. And for my clients, it feels like I've got a team around me of people that I now trust because I see them a lot. But everybody is self-employed. But although it's been pretty hard with the pandemic, I kind of have really enjoyed it, and I am still loving it. And it's because I can just be completely me. I don't have to try and be anything different, but that really works in this market for like clients like that I've got kids, and they can and the important thing is that they do identify with you. You're not trying to be some higher plane professional ivory tower type person. The more relatable you can be, the better, because most of these people wouldn't have employed an architect or ever thought that they could, whereas we're trying to be quite accessible within this market that doesn't have many architects. And the few that have had architects generally don't have brilliant things to say about them because they probably haven't approached the right sort of architect for their job, or they thought they were going to get something that they just never would do for their budget. So yeah, really interesting. But so we had to completely change how we worked, and it is all online, and I am really missing seeing people and actually that proper interaction with clients. But because we did go online, we've made it work. Like we hardly had a gap. We immediately took everything the appointments that we did have online, I had only just started, so I didn't have many bookings anyway. So that was the hardest thing for me, getting new clients in. But now, a year on, they just are coming. Like, I'm super busy, and people are just finding me. And I do lots of social media and bits and pieces, but it's what I'm doing, I think, now is enough to make it a viable business. And yeah, it's buoyant.
Wow, you should be very proud, especially during a difficult time. I always admire people that go out and set things up. And I think the important thing here is Pride Road. It's amazing, the franchise. This is a supportive model, but it takes two to tango, right? And you've got to want to do the dance. You've got to be the mover and shaker. You've got to go to the client's house, and that really comes from you as well. So, hey, if I had my soundboard here, sorry, because I'm moving, I'd do the clap. But yeah, no, I think it's amazing. You. Yeah, I really do, and I love what you're talking about. These partnerships involved. You're working with Lisa. She's thinking about the overall picture, and as well, what I think is what makes sense is with you, it's the personal connection to your neighboring areas, going around, helping people out, giving them frank advice. And I think to me, because I found you because I've got the Architecture Social Instagram, and I do follow you. And okay. I do you know what? You laugh because I now and then I will watch your things because one or two clips that come to mind is like you going for a walk, you going on the beach, and Bournemouth Beach, right? Is it Bournemouth? Is that correct?
Bournemouth, yeah.
Yeah, Bournemouth Beach. And I enjoyed it. And I felt like it was a bit relaxed, not pushy. And I think that's the point, that if I was looking for, say now, an improvement to my home, that's probably the kind of person that I would approach. Because what I like here, there's kind of a softer image of the architect, not necessarily, the Le Corbusier glass door. You're coming in here, how dare you ask that about your house? So I think it's all quite approachable and it works. And I think that there's always room for the Broadway Mellions of the world, and they're good employers, and it's a totally different thing. But what I admire here is what we're talking about is, community-based, amazing architectural projects which improve people's lives. And it's great that, above all, what I like about this is it's allowed you to kind of be successful and have a family. Do you know what I mean? So it's allowed you to dictate it. You're the boss of you. And I know that's a blessing and burden from experience, because also being the boss of yourself, I imagine that you can be hypercritical. It's easy to start going like, I need to do this, I need to do that. But then it's nice that you have a support framework there. So look, this is an amazing overview. I'm quite keen to, while we're here, we were talking about the Instagram. So for anyone listening, they can find your Instagram. Do you want to give all your social media handles as well?
Yeah. So Instagram is at Laura Pride Road. Mm-hmm. Just checking. And then I've got a Facebook page. If you the Facebook page we use a lot is very useful for local clients. So it's the Facebook road. It's Pride Road South is my Facebook page, and then my Instagram handles at Laura Pride Road, and I'm just me on Facebook. I'm not very good on. I am on LinkedIn, but I'm not very good on it, and Twitter I'm kind of avoiding at the moment.
Oh, do you know what? I'm glad you said. Do you know what, Twitter? I just feel like it's just sometimes it's just people venting their frustrations into a cave of nothingness. Like, it's just sometimes I feel it's so pointless. So I think I prefer Instagram. I know it's owned by Facebook, and I know Facebook are not the most conscious people, but I do think that the platform's better, and it's quite nice to see your architecture on there as well. Do me a favor at the end, Laura, you need to add me on LinkedIn, because I can no longer add any more people, so please do add me. And what I would say here is what I'm going to do now is, so this will all be on the website. We need to get you in the Architecture Social if you're not, Laura. I'm going to get you there because when we post it, anyone that's got any questions, they can drop you a question.
Yeah, of course.
That's what it's all about, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
I've really, really enjoyed this. I think it's absolutely, I've really enjoyed learning about everything about Broadway Mallion to the library to Pride Road. That's what it's all about, the journey.
I bet definitely a unique career path, I reckon. I challenge anyone to have quite so many turns in their trajectory to stardom.
I've don't quite top the library, but I was a part two, is now a recruitment consultant. So, you know, I've broken the mold. You got to mix up the formula. This has been great. And so parting words before you go. So for anyone right now, our listeners right now, I always think that it's a difficult time, but things are starting to look better. Things are starting to go well. But if there's anyone that was in your position before that's kind of feeling like my current situation's not right, or they want to mix something up, what would you advise people to do? Go on Google in the night and kind of find the way, or what's your thoughts?
My thoughts are that your instincts know. You know that what's that saying about when you're ready, the right teacher comes? Some sort of Buddhist saying, isn't it? And for me, my instinct was telling me when I chose Pride Road, when I met Lisa, she was that person that she had 3 kids. I was like, I honestly didn't think there was another architect in the whole country that had 3 kids. I thought I was the only one. And finding your tribe, finding that person that's like you at your time is amazing, because then you have a role model. So I would say, whatever stage you are, the power of role models, or, you know, like I was saying earlier, that person that's when it's a bit like an apprenticeship, to find that role model. So they might not be in your current practice, but they might be in your local council, or they might be in the RIBA if you went to a local RIBA thing. Find that person that you really connect with, and then amazing things will happen, because you'll have the confidence to be you, and then you'll ask the right questions, and then you'll really grow.
Wow. What a fantastic way to end this episode. Thank you for coming on, Laura. You are an absolute gem. Please do keep sending the Instagram stories of you on the beach, because I quite enjoy it. There's not a beach near me. I'm in London. Okay. And keep doing amazing architecture. And well done on your successful architecture practice during the pandemic. Thank you so much, Laura.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Bye-bye.